Good morning, everyone. As someone who toils with economic data every day and keeps my head down, it's always great to come out and see a room full of people that are starting their day off looking at it with me. Sometimes it takes a lot of company to make this stuff feel a little better. The number one question I get whenever I come out is, do you have better news for me? I have a qualified yes on that as we start out today. We've been through some tough times, we know that. It's been 4+ years of recovery from the Great Recession, and as we look ahead to year 5, I think we do have some better news for you this morning. Is it going to be full-blown great times are here again? No, we have challenges. But I think what we can start to look forward to is perhaps some of the headwinds that have been buffeting us for the last several years starting to abate. I think we will see that nationally, we'll see that globally, and we'll see that right here in the CenterState region. So we're going to go through some of those trends with you that I think will help you as you look out to the coming year to plan, to understand the aspects of the economy that may influence you from a personal or professional position. And hopefully, again, as we leave today, that we'll have a little better understanding of where we're headed as we go out into the brave new world of the economy of this century that can swing on a dime, but still has some of the fundamentals that we all have learned over the years. So let's start our discussion today with some of my pictures. All right. Picture's worth 1,000 words, and I think to understand where we are today, we have to see where we've come from, how that economic performance has played out. Clearly, we have come a ways from the Great Recession, 17 consecutive quarters of growth, and we expect the fourth quarter numbers when they come out in a few weeks will also show another upturn. We are 10% above the bottom, so we've made progress. We're over 5% above the previous peak, so we've made progress. But as we all know, that progress really has not been as strong as we would have liked. Clearly, if this had been a recession recovery, much like we've experienced in prior years, we would be a much larger economy today than we are. Embedded in all of this is the fact that demand has not come back up as much as we've seen in past recoveries. We're going to have to continue to work to get the curve bent, if you will, back towards a more normalcy. We think that's probably going to be occurring starting in 14. It's been a continuous process throughout this entire time, but we still have work to go. Nowhere is that work more important than in our labor markets. The unemployment numbers you see here are still sobering, even though we dipped below 7% last month for the first time in the recovery on the official unemployment rate. If you look at the broader unemployment that includes people working part-time, somewhat marginally attached, 13% still not fully engaged in the labor force. And this is something that is going to be a headwind again in 14, and we have to make sure our policies are really focused on improving the match of employer and employee looking for work as we head into the year. But here starts to get some of the good news. Why do we think that 14 is going to be a better year? Well, a couple things. Another year of housing recovery nationally, and we know housing certainly wasn't as affected here in central New York as it was elsewhere, but it's a big deal for the country to finally get housing moving in the right direction. It lifts a number of homeowners that have been underwater, above water. It creates net worth. It creates something we remember from a few years back, perhaps called the wealth effect. When homeowners and others feel better about their personal situation, they're going to be in a better position to spend. So we think, again, another year of progress here. Certainly an area that's going to affect central New York and all of upstate New York is the manufacturing world. And we're going to talk about this a bit in some of our slides to come. But we're seeing a much better ending to 13 and entry to 14 in manufacturing from a global perspective, from a U.S. perspective. The activity has certainly improved, and that's key to moving us into a better growth rate in 2014. Again, I mentioned much of our problem over the last several years has been a lack of demand, and we're starting to see some of that demand equation change a bit, which will again help out our manufacturers. Finally, a year of perhaps calm when it comes to fiscal policy. There's no question the last several years have been disrupted by events in Washington. And no matter what your stance on the events that have occurred, they have had an impact on the economy to the tune of this year taking almost 1.5 points of growth off an economy that is only growing at around 2%. The good news here, though, is that the private sector has been steadily improving across that period. So if we remove some of the dysfunction around fiscal policy, and we think that's occurred now that we have a federal budget, and hopefully next month some addressing of the debt ceiling limit in a more adult fashion, I think we'll have a better 14 simply from the standpoint we don't have these drags. So removing the drags is an important element to moving forward. We've had an economy that has gone forward, gone backward. The two-step is getting a little more removed from the equation. So our forecast for the coming year is more of the same, only a little better. 2.8% growth, a point better than a year ago at the national level. I think this is going to be occurring globally again, so it's important that this just isn't a U.S. event, but it's a coordinated effort among nations around the globe. In fact, one of the more important things that we'll have to watch is Europe, who after some very tough years is looking to expand for the first time in a number of years again. So getting that coordinated global growth going for us will set us up for what happens right here in New York. So let's switch to the good stuff. What is going to be our expectations for the coming year? Well, let's start with employment. There's no secret that this is a region that less boom, less bust is sort of our mantra. We didn't have the downturn during the Great Recession in terms of employment losses. That story's been told several years now running. As you can see, the recovery, though, has been a bit choppy and not quite as strong as the rest of the country. Although if you have very good eyes, you can see that 2013 set of numbers is a little bit better than the previous years, a little bit more consistent, and hopefully if we get some luck in some of the impediments in that number, we'll move again to a higher plane than we've been. Another way of looking at this set of numbers is we're performing better right now, albeit sluggishly, than we were before the recession. So we're making progress. We just have to make sure we ramp it up a bit more. Looking at the metro areas across upstate and in the region, it's a bit of a mixed performance. You can see here that the hallmark and defining characteristic of employment growth this past year in upstate New York has been exposure to manufacturing. The areas at the bottom of this list tend to have more of it than the national average or close to the national average. The areas that have been performing the strongest are the least exposed to manufacturing. So we're going to be talking more about manufacturing throughout the course of the remaining minutes we have together because it's an important part of what happens in 2014. To give you a sense of that again, this is the performance of the region in terms of its manufacturing job base relative to the starting point of January 2007 and the U.S. performance. We have seen, again, a continuation of a slow decline in that particular sector of our economy over the intervening years since the recovery began, and a divergence with the U.S. number. What we really have to focus on is getting this number at least flatlined, and hopefully improved over the course of the coming year so we don't have sort of the leaking of air out of the balloon that we've had over the course of the last year and before. We're hopeful that the turnaround in industrial activity at the global level will have an impact right here, particularly on our small and mid-sized companies who have performed pretty well throughout this period, and then also with some of our larger manufacturing and industrial employers that hopefully will see some better demand and move this number up. Because if you take away the downward pressure on the manufacturing number, it will enormously help this particular set of data. Outside of manufacturing, we continue to add jobs. We continue to move forward. We have more jobs today than we've ever had. That is important to move the momentum of the region forward. We've taken a different path to get where we are today than the U.S. number, but we're actually at about the same level as the country when it comes to this particular aspect of the economy. So what we need to do, again, is focus on how can we address those manufacturing problems. And again, the governor's tax policies and proposals, rather, are a stepping stone to that. Some of the efforts of our local regional planning commissions, everyone has a vested interest in moving that number, because then the virtuous cycle that we see here on areas outside of manufacturing can really get a little more momentum behind it. If we look to the latter half of 13 for some guidance into 2014, you can see that we are still on a bit of that one step forward, one step back track, where we had some nice progress in terms of adding employment and income at the top of this chart in a number of industries. And yet, for all the support and progress we made there, an offset at the bottom in two key areas. Again, manufacturing, which we've talked about quite a bit, and also government, particularly in this number, the local government aspect. Again, these are areas we think for 14 will have less pressure on them. The manufacturing we've talked about from better demand. Government from the standpoint that more activity creates more revenue and less pressure on the budgets that we've seen that have been impacted, obviously, by the economic situation of the last few years. If we take away the downward pressure on these two areas, everything else will bubble up even more. So our forecast for the year, better, slightly better. We're going to still be conservative in this. If I had come out and said 4% growth, you'd probably all start throwing things at me up here because they wouldn't believe it. But I think we are going to turn the corner. And as we get through the year, if we don't have some of the speed bumps that we've had in the last several years that come out of left field on us, we can let the economic cycle start to get some momentum. And I think that's what we're going to see here in the CenterState region and in the U.S. and the global economy. A better turning upward from where we have been, and that's exactly what we need to go forward. Now, challenges, yes, we still have a challenge. And the biggest one is going to, again, be labor force efficiency. The matching of labor applicants to worker needs or employer needs. A lot of attention still needs to be paid for that, even though we are seeing some improvement in the jobless numbers. Some of this improvement is because, though, people are leaving the workforce. And we have to address the workforce issue needs, again, in 14 very much to make sure that this is not a drag beyond what we're seeing in a fundamental sense around the supply and demand equation. But the last slide I want to leave you with, I think, is the most optimistic one, and it's one I've been happy to sort of roll out this year as part of the presentation. We have made a lot of progress as a region, not just here in CenterState, but in Upstate New York overall, in getting back in the game, if you will, as far as getting our per capita personal income on a much better footing relative to the largest areas of the country, the 100 largest metropolitan areas. We have moved the needle higher in terms of our numbers versus that average, coming up almost 10 points in terms of getting closer to that average. We are a mid-size area that is never going to be able to compete with the largest metropolitan areas on an income basis, but to be seeing us falling further and further behind the pack as we were over much of the cycle before the Great Recession really was problematic in the sense that from an investment perspective, from a national retailer perspective, as we see here with Destiny, it makes a harder case. And as our case gets better relative to that national number, it makes us more attractive from an investment perspective. It makes us more competitive as a place to do business because we have money on a more equal footing relative to the rest of the country. We have a real window of opportunity to capitalize on this over the course of the next few years and make our case. And from an economic development standpoint, I think it's important that we understand that we are more competitively well-positioned than we've been when it comes to spending power and economic activity, even if it has been growing at a relatively slow pace. So I think the challenge that we all have is to take advantage of this opportunity that we have to make our case that this region is in a good place to do business, a good place to make investments, a good place to live and work. And I think all of you coming out today are the messengers for that. And I hope that you take away today that we're making progress, but we have a lot more to do. But if we have to do anything, we have to make the story told to folks not just in the local community, but around the country and the globe. I think this organization does an excellent job of that, and I applaud their efforts. I applaud all of you for coming out today to take part in this event. And with that, I think I will exit stage right, and thank you again for all coming. All right, thank you.